The morning sun was already bright over Los Angeles when Clint Eastwood stepped out of his simple black truck at the airport. At 93 years old, he still moved with the quiet confidence that had made him famous in countless movies. He wore his usual clothes, a plain blue flannel shirt, dark jeans, and worn leather boots. No fancy suits or expensive watches, just a regular man who happened to be one of the biggest movie stars in the world. Clint pulled his small travel bag from the back seat and walked toward the busy terminal. People rushed past him in all directions, most too busy with their phones to notice the legendary actor walking among them. That was exactly how Clint liked it. After more than 60 years in Hollywood, he had learned to value his privacy above almost everything else. The airport was packed with travelers that Tuesday morning. Families dragged heavy suitcases while business people hurried past with their laptops and coffee cups. Flight announcements echoed through the building every few minutes. Clint made his way through the crowd slowly in no rush to get anywhere. He had learned long ago that life was better when you took time to notice what was happening around you. At the security checkpoint, a young woman recognized him and whispered excitedly to her friend. Clint gave them a small nod and a gentle smile, but kept walking. He had dealt with fans for decades and knew how to be polite without encouraging too much attention. The last thing he wanted was a crowd gathering around him before his flight to New York. After passing through security, Clint found his gate and settled into one of the hard plastic chairs. His flight would not leave for another hour, so he pulled out a book and began reading. The gate area was filling up with other passengers, and he glanced up occasionally to watch people coming and going. That was when he first noticed Jake Miller. The young man looked to be in his early 30s, with short brown hair and tired eyes. That seemed older than his face. He wore a military uniform that had clearly seen better days. The fabric was faded in some places, and there were patches sewn onto the sleeves that showed he had served overseas. He carried only a small green duffel bag, the kind soldiers used when they traveled light. Jake stood near the gate counter, looking at his boarding pass with a confused expression. He approached the airline worker behind the desk and spoke quietly to her. Even from a distance, Clint could see that something was wrong. The young soldier's shoulders were tense, and he kept running his hand through his hair like he was stressed about something. Clint watched as Jake walked away from the counter and found a seat in the corner of the waiting area. The soldier sat down heavily and stared at his boarding pass for a long time. He looked tired in a way that went deeper than just needing sleep. Clint had seen that look before in other veterans he had met over the years. It was the look of someone who had been through things that were hard to forget. When the airline worker announced that first-class passengers could begin boarding, Clint stood up and gathered his things. As he walked toward the gate, he passed close to where Jake was sitting. The young man was still staring at his boarding pass, and Clint could see that it showed a middle seat in row 28. Near the back of the plane, squeezed between two strangers for a 6-hour flight. Clint had been flying first class for decades. His movie career had given him enough money to travel comfortably, and at his age, the extra space and better service made long flights much easier. But looking at this tired young soldier, something stirred in his chest. A feeling that reminded him of the values his parents had taught him growing up during the Great Depression, when people looked out for each other. Without thinking too much about it, Clint changed direction and walked over to where Jake was sitting. "Excuse me, son," Clint said quietly. Jake looked up, surprised. His eyes widened slightly when he recognized the famous face, but he did not make a big deal about it. "Yes, sir," Jake replied, starting to stand up. "Stay seated," Clint said with a small wave of his hand. "I could not help but notice you are traveling in uniform. Are you heading home?" Jake nodded. "Yes, sir." "Well, sort of. I am going to New York for something important." Clint studied the young man's face. There was sadness there, mixed with something that looked like duty. The kind of expression soldiers wore when they had to do something difficult but necessary. "I am Clint," he said, extending his hand. "Jake Miller, sir." "I know who you are," Jake replied, shaking hands. His grip was firm and honest. "I have a first-class seat on this flight," Clint continued, "but I think you need it more than I do. Would you mind switching with me?" Jake's eyes went wide. "Oh no, sir, I could not possibly do that." Thank you, but I am fine where I am. Clint smiled. He had expected this response. In his experience, the people who deserved help the most were usually the ones who refused to accept it. Son, I have been flying in comfortable seats for longer than you have been alive. One flight in the back of the plane is not going to hurt me. Besides, you look like you have been through enough lately without having to squeeze into a middle seat for 6 hours. Jake started to protest again, but something in Clint's voice stopped him. It was not the voice of a movie star trying to make a grand gesture. It was the voice of one human being genuinely wanting to help another. Are you sure, sir? Jake asked quietly. I am absolutely sure, Clint replied. He pulled out his boarding pass and held it out. Seat 2A, window seat, plenty of room, and they will bring you whatever you want to eat or drink. Jake took the boarding pass with shaking hands. I do not know what to say, sir. This is incredibly kind of you. No need to say anything, Clint said, taking Jake's boarding pass in return. Just enjoy the flight. Other passengers had started to notice what was happening. A few people had recognized Clint and were watching the exchange with interest. Someone pulled out their phone to take a picture, but Clint gave them a look that made them put it away quickly. The gate agent called for first-class passengers to board again. Jake stood up, still looking stunned by what had just happened. Thank you, Mr. Eastwood, he said formally. I will never forget this. Just Clint is fine, the actor replied. And Jake? Whatever you are going to New York for, I hope it goes well. Jake nodded, picked up his duffel bag and walked toward the gate. Clint watched him go, then settled back into his chair to wait for his group to be called. He noticed several other passengers looking at him with expressions ranging from admiration to curiosity, but he ignored them and went back to his book. 20 minutes later, when the final boarding group was called, Clint made his way onto the plane. He found his new seat in row 28 and squeezed his tall frame into the middle spot, between a businessman reading emails and a college student listening to music. Neither of them recognized him, which was exactly how he preferred it. The plane pulled away from the gate. Clint looked toward the front of the aircraft and wondered about the young soldier now sitting in luxury. Something told him that this simple act of kindness was going to lead to something much bigger than either of them could imagine. Jake Miller settled into seat 2A and tried not to feel out of place. The first-class cabin was unlike anything he had ever experienced. The leather seat was wide enough for 2 people, and it could recline almost flat like a bed. A flight attendant, named Maria, came over with a warm smile and offered him champagne, orange juice, or water before takeoff. Just water, please, Jake said quietly. He was not used to people waiting on him like this. Maria brought him a real glass filled with ice, water, and a small plate of mixed nuts. Is this your first time flying first class? She asked kindly. Jake nodded. Yes, ma'am. A very nice man gave me a seat. That was Mr. Eastwood, wasn't it? Maria said. I saw what happened at the gate. That was really something special. Jake looked out the window as the plane began to move away from the terminal. He still could not believe what had happened. Growing up in a small town in Ohio, he had never imagined that a famous movie star would give up his expensive seat for a regular soldier like him. The plane lifted off from Los Angeles, and Jake watched the city get smaller below them. He had been flying a lot lately, mostly on military transport planes that were nothing like this. Those flights were cramped and noisy, filled with soldiers and equipment heading to dangerous places. This felt like a dream in comparison. For the first hour of the flight, Jake tried to relax and enjoy the comfortable seat. The flight attendants brought him a hot meal on real plates with metal silverware. There was chicken with some kind of fancy sauce, vegetables he did not recognize, and a small chocolate cake for dessert. Everything tasted better than any airplane food he had ever eaten. But as good as the food was, and as comfortable as the seat felt, Jake could not stop thinking about the man who had made this possible. Clint Eastwood was sitting in a cramped middle seat in the back of the plane while Jake enjoyed luxury he had never paid for. It did not feel right. Jake had grown up watching Clint Eastwood movies with his grandfather. The old man loved westerns, and they would spend Sunday afternoons watching films like The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and Unforgiven. His grandfather always said that Clint played characters who did the right thing, even when it was hard. Now Jake had seen that this was not just acting. About 3 hours into the flight, Jake made a decision. He unbuckled his seatbelt and stood up. Maria, the flight attendant, was walking by with coffee for other passengers. "Excuse me," Jake said. "Would it be okay if I went back to talk to the gentleman who gave me this seat?" Maria smiled. "Of course. Just be careful walking through the cabin during flight." Jake made his way through the plane, past the business class section, and into the main cabin. The difference was obvious immediately. The seats were much smaller and closer together. People were squeezed in tight, trying to sleep or read or watch movies on tiny screens. He found Clint in row 28, sitting between the businessman and the college student, just as Jake had expected to do. The famous actor was reading a Tio paperback book and seemed completely comfortable despite being folded into the small space. "Mr. Eastwood," Jake said softly. Clint looked up from his book. "Jake, how are you enjoying first class? That is what I wanted to talk to you about, sir. This does not feel right. You should not be sitting back here because of me." Clint closed his book and looked at Jake with those famous eyes that had stared down bad guys in dozens of movies. But there was nothing scary about his expression. It was kind and patient. "Son, I told you at the airport that I wanted you to have that seat. I meant it. But sir, you paid for it. And you are—" Jake struggled to find the right words. "You are Clint Eastwood. You should not be squeezed in here like this." The businessman next to Clint looked up from his laptop. "Wait, you are Clint Eastwood?" he said, suddenly interested. "Could we have a little privacy?" Clint asked politely but firmly. The businessman nodded and went back to his computer. Clint stood up in the narrow aisle. Even at 93, he was still tall and had to bend slightly to avoid hitting his head on the overhead compartments. "Jake, can I ask you something personal?" "Yes, sir." "What are you going to New York for?" Jake was quiet for a moment. This was the question he had been dreading since he bought his plane ticket. The reason he was making this trip was something he did not like to talk about, even with people he knew well. "I am going to a memorial service," Jake said finally. I'm sorry to hear that. Family? My best friend. His name was Danny Rodriguez. We served together in Afghanistan." Clint's expression became even more serious. "How many tours did you do?" 3. Danny did 3 too. We met during our first deployment and ended up in the same unit for all of them. "And he did not make it home from the last one?" Jake shook his head. He felt his throat getting tight the way it always did when he talked about Danny. "No, sir. He was killed by a roadside bomb 2 months ago. I was supposed to be in that vehicle with him, but I was sick that day and stayed back at base." Clint was quiet for a long moment. Jake could see something change in the older man's face. It was the look of someone who understood that some experiences could not be fixed with money or fame or comfortable airplane seats. "That is a heavy burden to carry," Clint said quietly. "Yes, sir, it is. Danny saved my life more than once over there. He was the best medic in our unit and one of the best people I ever knew. His wife and little girl are waiting for me in New York. I promised Danny that if anything ever happened to him, I would make sure they were okay." "What was Danny like?" Jake's face brightened a little. "He was funny, sir. Always making jokes even when things were really bad. He could make anyone laugh. And he was brave, but not in a crazy way. He was brave in a smart way, if that makes sense. He thought about things before he acted, but he never hesitated when someone needed help. Sounds like a good man." "The best, sir. He had big dreams, too. He wanted to make movies when he got out of the Army. He was always writing stories about the guys in our unit and the things we saw over there. Not the violent stuff, but the human stuff. The way soldiers take care of each other. The way we miss home. Things like that." Clint nodded slowly. "Those are important stories to tell." Danny thought so too. He said movies about war usually get it wrong. They make it too simple. Good guys and bad guys. But Danny said real war is more complicated than that. He wanted to show what it was really like. Did he have any training in filmmaking? Not really. He just loved movies and had good ideas. He used to say that stories matter because they help people understand each other. The plane hit some turbulence and both men grabbed the seatbacks to steady themselves. The pilot came on the intercom and asked everyone to return to their seats and fasten their seatbelts. "I should let you get back to first class," Clint said. "Sir, I still do not feel right about taking your seat." Clint put his hand on Jake's shoulder. "Jake, I have been flying in comfortable seats for 40 years. One flight in coach is not going to hurt me. But you are carrying something much heavier than I am. You deserve a little comfort right now." Jake felt his eyes getting wet. He had not expected this conversation to affect him so much. "Thank you, sir. For the seat, and for listening. Thank you for your service, and for being the kind of friend who keeps his promises." Jake made his way back to first class as the plane continued to bounce through the clouds. He settled back into his comfortable seat and looked out at the darkness outside. In a few hours he would be in New York, facing one of the hardest things he had ever had to do. But somehow, talking to Clint Eastwood had made him feel a little less alone. In the back of the plane, Clint opened his book again, but found it hard to concentrate on the words. He kept thinking about Jake and Danny and the stories that young soldier had wanted to tell. Some conversations changed you, and Clint had a feeling this was one of them. The plane touched down at John F. Kennedy Airport just after 8 in the evening. Jake looked out the window at the lights of New York City and felt his stomach tighten with nervousness. He had been dreading this trip for weeks, but he knew he had to come. He had made a promise to Danny, and keeping promises to fallen friends was something soldiers took very seriously. As the plane taxied to the gate, Jake gathered his small duffel bag and prepared to leave the comfortable first-class cabin. Maria, the flight attendant, stopped by his seat one more time. "I hope everything goes well for you in New York," she said kindly. "Thank you, ma'am, and thank you for taking such good care of me during the flight." Jake was one of the first passengers off the plane. He walked through the long hallway into the terminal and found himself in the middle of the usual airport chaos. People were running to catch connecting flights, families were hugging after long separations, and taxi drivers were holding signs with passengers' names written on them. He was looking for the signs that would direct him to baggage claim when he heard a familiar voice behind him. "Jake, wait up." He turned around and saw Clint Eastwood walking toward him. The older man was carrying his own small bag and moving through the crowd with the same quiet confidence Jake had noticed at the Los Angeles airport. "Mr. Eastwood, how was the rest of your flight?" "Just fine. That middle seat was not as bad as I expected." Clint smiled. "How about you? Did you get some rest?" "A little. Those seats are amazing. I have never slept on an airplane before." They walked together toward the baggage claim area, moving slowly with the crowd of other passengers. Jake noticed that a few people were starting to recognize Clint, but the actor seemed expert at avoiding eye contact in a way that discouraged anyone from approaching him. "Jake, I have been thinking about our conversation during the flight," Clint said as they waited for the baggage carousel to start moving. "Yes, sir?" "You mentioned that you were here for Danny's memorial service. When is that happening?" "Tomorrow afternoon. It is going to be small, just family and a few close friends. Danny's wife Lisa wanted to keep it private." "I understand that completely. Grief is personal." The baggage carousel started moving, and suitcases began sliding down the chute. Jake only had his duffel bag, so he had nothing to wait for, but Clint was watching for his luggage. "Can I ask you something?" Clint continued. "You said you promised Danny you would take care of his family if something happened to him. What exactly does that mean?" Jake shifted his weight from one foot to the other. This was another difficult topic, but something about Clint made him feel comfortable sharing things he normally kept private. Danny's wife Lisa is a nurse, so she has a good job. But she is trying to raise their little girl Emma by herself now. Emma is only 5 years old, and she has been having a really hard time since her dad died. "What kind of hard time?" "She stopped talking for a while. She was having nightmares every night. Lisa took her to see a counselor, and that helped some, but Emma is still very scared and sad most of the time." Clint spotted his black suitcase and pulled it off the moving belt. "That is rough for a little kid. Lisa says Emma asks about her daddy every day. She wants to know when he is coming home, and Lisa has to explain over and over that he is not coming back. It breaks Lisa's heart every time. They walked toward the exit, following signs for ground transportation. The airport was busy even at this late hour, with people coming and going from all over the world. "So what can you do to help them?" Clint asked. "I'm not really sure, to be honest. I have some money saved up that I want to give to Lisa for Emma's college fund, and I promised I would visit them regularly and be like an uncle to Emma. Someone she can talk to about her dad when she gets older." "That sounds like a good plan." "I hope so. I have never been around kids much. I am worried I will not know what to say to her." They reached the area where taxis and ride-shares picked up passengers. Long lines of people were waiting for cars, and the noise of traffic and honking horns filled the air. "Jake, I know this might sound strange, but I have an idea." "What kind of idea, sir?" Clint set down his suitcase and looked directly at Jake. "I am going to be in New York for the next few days working on a project. I was wondering if there might be some way I could meet Lisa and Emma." Jake was surprised by this suggestion. "You want to meet them? Why?" "I have grandchildren of my own, and I know how hard it can be for kids when they lose someone important. Sometimes talking to a stranger can be easier than talking to family members. There is less pressure." Jake thought about this for a moment. "I am not sure, Mr. Eastwood. Lisa is very protective of Emma right now. She does not let many people around her. I understand that completely. I'm not trying to push myself into their lives. But if you think it might help, I would be happy to meet them. Sometimes kids respond well to older people. We seem less threatening than younger adults. Can I ask why you would want to do this? You have already done so much by giving me your airplane seat." Clint was quiet for a moment, watching the taxis come and go. "Jake, I have been very lucky in my life. I have had a successful career, good health, and a wonderful family. But I have also learned that none of that matters much if you do not use it to help other people when you can." "That is very kind of you, sir. Plus, you mentioned that Danny wanted to make movies. That is something I know a little about. Maybe I could share some stories about filmmaking that Emma might enjoy hearing about her father's dreams." Jake felt a small spark of hope. He had been dreading his visit with Lisa and Emma because he was not sure how to comfort them. Having someone like Clint there might actually make things easier. "Let me call Lisa and ask her," Jake said, pulling out his phone. "Are you sure? I do not want to put you in an awkward position." "No, it is okay. Lisa is a good person, and she wants what is best for Emma. If she thinks meeting you might help her daughter, she will say yes." Jake found Lisa's number and pressed call. The phone rang 3 times before she answered. "Jake, did you land safely?" "Yes, I am at the airport now." "Lisa, I know this is going to sound crazy, but I met someone on the plane who wants to help with Emma." "What do you mean?" Jake looked at Clint, who nodded encouragingly. "I met Clint Eastwood on the flight, the actor and director. He gave me his first-class seat, and we got to talking about Danny and Emma. He has grandchildren of his own, and he thinks he might be able to help Emma feel better." There was a long pause on the other end of the phone. Jake could hear Emma's voice in the background asking who was calling. "Clint Eastwood wants to meet Emma?" Lisa said finally. "Only if you think it would be good for her. He said sometimes kids find it easier to talk to strangers than to family members." Another pause. "Jake, are you sure this is real? This is not some kind of joke?" "I am completely sure, Lisa. He is standing right here next to me. He seems like a really genuine person. Can I talk to him?" Jake looked at Clint, who nodded and held out his hand for the phone. "Lisa, this is Clint Eastwood. I want you to know that I would never do anything to upset you or your daughter. I simply thought that if Emma is struggling with her father's death, maybe talking to someone who is not part of the family might help her process her feelings." Jake could not hear Lisa's side of the conversation, but he watched Clint's face as he listened to her response. "I understand your concerns completely," Clint continued. "Why don't you think about it tonight? Jake can call you in the morning, and if you decide you would like to meet, we could have a short visit. If not, that is perfectly fine too." Clint handed the phone back to Jake. "Lisa, what do you think?" "Jake, I am so confused right now. Did Clint Eastwood really just offer to help my daughter? Yes, he did. And Lisa, I think he means it. He seems like the kind of person who does what he says he will do. Emma has been asking me all day if you were really coming to visit. She is more excited about seeing you than she has been about anything in months. I am excited to see her too. Okay, Jake. If you think this man is trustworthy, then I will trust your judgment. Can you both come over tomorrow morning before the memorial service? Jake looked at Clint, who nodded. We will be there, Lisa, and thank you for being open to this. I just want Emma to be happy again, Jake. If there is any chance this could help her, then I want to try it. After they hung up, Jake and Clint stood in the busy airport for a moment, both thinking about what they had just agreed to do. Are you sure about this, Mr. Eastwood? Meeting a grieving widow and her daughter is not exactly a small commitment. Clint picked up his suitcase and smiled. Jake, I have a feeling that meeting your friend's family is going to be one of the most important things I do this year. As they walked toward the taxi line, neither man could have imagined how right Clint's prediction would turn out to be. The next morning, Jake stood outside a small apartment building in Queens, checking the address on his phone one more time. The neighborhood was quiet and working class, with narrow streets lined with old brick buildings and small shops. Children's toys were scattered on some of the front steps, and he could hear music playing from an open window somewhere above. Clint arrived in a simple gray taxi just as Jake was putting his phone back in his pocket. The famous actor stepped out of the car wearing dark jeans, a plain white shirt, and a brown leather jacket. He looked around the neighborhood with interest, taking in the details the way someone does when they want to understand a place. This is it? Clint asked, looking up at the 3-story building. Apartment 2B, Jake confirmed. Lisa said to come up the front stairs and knock on the second door on the left. They climbed the narrow staircase together. The building was old, but well-maintained, with clean hallways and fresh paint on the walls. Jake could smell someone cooking breakfast, and he heard a television playing cartoons somewhere nearby. Jake knocked gently on the door marked 2B. They heard footsteps inside, and then the door opened to reveal a young woman with long dark hair and tired eyes. She was pretty in a natural way, wearing simple clothes and no makeup. This was Lisa Rodriguez, and Jake could see immediately that she had been crying recently. Jake, she said, giving him a warm hug. I am so glad you are here. Hi, Lisa. This is Clint Eastwood. Lisa looked at Clint with a mixture of curiosity and nervousness. Mr. Eastwood, thank you for wanting to help Emma. I have to admit I did not sleep much last night thinking about this. Please call me Clint. And I completely understand your concerns. I would feel the same way if I were in your position. Lisa stepped back to let them into the apartment. It was small but cozy, with family photos covering most of the walls. Jake noticed pictures of Danny in his military uniform, Danny and Lisa on their wedding day, and lots of photos of a little girl with big dark eyes and a bright smile. Emma is in her room right now, Lisa said quietly. She has been very shy since Danny died. She might not talk much at first. That is perfectly normal, Clint said. Kids process grief differently than adults. Sometimes they need more time to feel safe with new people. Lisa led them into the small living room, where toys were scattered on the floor and coloring books were stacked on the coffee table. The apartment felt lived in and loved, but Jake could sense the sadness that hung in the air like invisible smoke. Can I get you something to drink? Coffee, tea, water? Coffee would be great, Jake said. Same for me, thank you, Clint added. While Lisa went to the kitchen, Jake and Clint sat on the couch and looked around the room. Jake pointed to a large photo on the wall showing Danny in full military gear, standing with his arm around Jake in what looked like a desert landscape. That was taken during our second deployment, Jake explained quietly. We had just finished a really difficult mission, and we were both exhausted. But Danny insisted we take a picture because he said we needed to remember the good moments along with the hard ones. Clint studied the photo carefully. He looks like he was a good leader. The best. Everyone in our unit trusted him completely. Lisa returned with 3 cups of coffee and sat down in a chair across from them. Emma knows you are here, she said. I told her that Jake brought a friend who makes movies and that you wanted to hear about her daddy's stories. How did she react to that? Clint asked. She got excited for the first time in weeks. She ran to her room and came back with a notebook that Danny used to write in when he was home on leave. She has been carrying it around ever since he died. Just then, they heard small footsteps in the hallway. A little girl appeared in the doorway, partially hiding behind the wall. She had the same dark eyes as her mother and wore a pink dress with cartoon characters on it. In her arms, she clutched a worn notebook. "Emma, come say hello to Jake," Lisa said gently. Emma ran to Jake and threw her arms around him. "Jake, Mommy said you were coming to see me." "Hi, sweetheart. I missed you." Jake hugged her tightly. "I brought someone with me who wanted to meet you." Emma looked at Clint with curious but cautious eyes. She did not hide behind Jake, but she stayed close to him. "Emma, this is my friend Clint. He makes movies." "Like the movies Daddy wanted to make?" Emma asked in a small voice. "Yes, exactly like that," Clint said, speaking softly. "Your daddy wanted to tell stories about soldiers, right?" Emma nodded and held up the notebook. "He wrote stories in here. Mommy reads them to me sometimes." "That sounds very special. Would you like to tell me about the stories?" Emma looked at her mother, who nodded encouragingly. Slowly, the little girl walked over to where Clint was sitting and climbed onto the couch next to him. "This one is about Jake," she said, opening the notebook to a page covered with Danny's handwriting. "Daddy wrote about how Jake saved a hurt soldier during a big fight." Clint looked at Jake with surprise. "Is that true?" Jake's face turned red. "Danny always exaggerated things." "No, he did not," Emma said firmly. "Daddy said you were the bravest person he knew." Clint smiled at Emma's serious expression. "What else did your daddy write about?" Emma flipped through the pages of the notebook. "He wrote about funny things too, like when the soldiers played jokes on each other, and about missing home, and about how much he loved Mommy and me." "Your daddy sounds like he was very good at telling stories." "He was. He used to make up bedtime stories for me every night when he was home. They were always about brave princesses who saved the day." Lisa wiped her eyes as she listened to her daughter talk about Danny. Jake could see how much it meant to her to hear Emma speaking positively about her father. "Emma, can I ask you something?" Clint said. "Okay. Do you think your daddy would want you to be sad all the time? Or do you think he would want you to remember the happy times you had together?" Emma thought about this question very seriously. "He would want me to be happy, but I miss him so much." "It is okay to miss him. Missing someone means you love them very much. But your daddy would want you to smile and laugh and play, even though he is not here anymore." "How do you know that?" "Because I am a daddy and a grandpa too. And the thing that makes parents happiest is seeing their children happy." Emma studied Clint's face for a long moment. Then she surprised everyone by climbing into his lap. "Will you read me one of Daddy's stories?" she asked. Clint looked at Lisa, who nodded through her tears. "I would be honored to read one of your daddy's stories." Emma handed him the notebook and pointed to a page near the middle. "This one is my favorite. It is about a soldier who finds a lost puppy and takes care of it." Clint began reading in his deep, gentle voice. The story was beautifully written, full of details that brought the characters to life. It was about compassion and responsibility and finding hope in difficult places. As he read, Jake realized that Danny had been a truly talented writer. When Clint finished the story, Emma clapped her hands. "Daddy was a good writer, wasn't he?" "He was an excellent writer," Clint said honestly. "These stories are really special, Emma." "Mommy, can Clint read another one?" Lisa smiled for the first time since they had arrived. "If Clint does not mind, I do not mind at all." For the next hour, Clint read story after story from Danny's notebook. Some were serious, some were funny, and all of them showed a deep understanding of human nature. Jake found himself learning things about his best friend that he had never known. Emma relaxed more and more as the morning went on. She asked Clint questions about making movies, and he told her simple stories about working with actors and cameras. She laughed when he described some of the silly mistakes that happened on movie sets. Clint, do you think Daddy's stories are good enough to be real movies? Emma asked. Clint looked at Lisa and then back at Emma. I think your daddy's stories are some of the best I have ever read. Really? Really? Your daddy had a gift for understanding people and telling their stories in a way that makes other people care about them. Emma beamed with pride. Jake had not seen her smile this much since before Danny died. As they prepared to leave for the memorial service, Emma hugged Clint tightly. Thank you for reading Daddy's stories, she said. Thank you for sharing them with me, Emma. They are treasures. As they walked down the stairs from the apartment, Jake felt amazed by what he had just witnessed. In one morning, Clint had managed to reach Emma in a way that months of counseling had not accomplished. That was incredible, Jake said as they reached the street. She is a remarkable little girl, Clint replied. And Danny was a remarkable writer. Those stories were genuinely good. Do you really think so? Clint stopped walking and looked at Jake seriously. Jake, I have been in the movie business for over 60 years. I have read thousands of scripts and stories. Danny had real talent. Those were not just nice stories written by a soldier. Those were the work of someone who could have been a professional writer. As they got into a taxi to go to the memorial service, both men were quiet, each lost in their own thoughts about the morning they had just shared. Neither of them could have guessed that they were about to learn something that would change everything they thought they knew about Danny Rodriguez. 3 weeks had passed since Clint returned to Los Angeles from New York. The memorial service for Danny Rodriguez had been beautiful and heartbreaking. Jake had spoken about his friend's courage and kindness, while Lisa had shared memories of Danny as a husband and father. Emma had been brave during the ceremony, holding tightly to both Jake's hand and Clint's hand as they said goodbye to her daddy. But Clint could not stop thinking about Danny's stories. He had asked Lisa if he could take copies of some of the notebooks with him back to California, and she had agreed immediately. She said that Danny would have been thrilled to know that a real movie director was interested in his writing. Now those notebooks sat on Clint's desk in his home office, filled with sticky notes and highlighted passages. He had read every story, multiple times, and each reading convinced him more that Danny Rodriguez had possessed genuine talent. The young soldier had understood something about storytelling that many professional writers never learned. His characters felt real, his dialogue sounded natural, and his plots had emotional depth that went beyond simple action and adventure. Clint had shown some of the stories to his longtime assistant and friend, Margaret Foster. Margaret had worked in Hollywood for 30 years and had read thousands of scripts. Her opinion was the same as Clint's. Danny's work was exceptional. These are not amateur stories, Margaret had told him. This young man had a natural gift. It is tragic that he never got the chance to develop it professionally. That morning, Clint made a decision that surprised even himself. He called his lawyer and asked him to begin the legal process of optioning Danny's stories for film development. It would be expensive and complicated, but Clint wanted to honor his friend's memory by bringing his stories to life on screen. His next call was to Lisa Rodriguez. The phone rang 4 times before Lisa answered. In the background, Clint could hear Emma playing and laughing, which made him smile. The little girl had seemed much happier when he left New York, and he was glad to hear that her improvement had continued. Clint, what a nice surprise. How are you? I am doing well, Lisa. How are you and Emma? We are getting better every day. Emma talks about you all the time. She tells everyone that her friend Clint makes movies and thinks her daddy was a great writer. Well, she is right about that. Lisa, that is actually why I am calling. I have been reading Danny's stories over and over, and I want to talk to you about possibly turning one of them into a movie. There was a long pause on the other end of the phone. Are you serious? Completely serious. The story about the soldier who saves his friend during the bombing. That one has all the elements of a powerful film. It has action, emotion, friendship, sacrifice. It is exactly the kind of story that needs to be told. Clint, I do not know what to say. Danny would have been so excited. There would be legal paperwork involved, and you would be paid for the rights to use his work. I want to make sure you and Emma are taken care of financially. Lisa started crying softly. This is like a dream come true. Danny always said his biggest hope was that his stories might help people understand what soldiers really go through. That is exactly what this movie would do. But Lisa, before we move forward with any of this, I need to ask you some questions about Danny's background. For the legal paperwork, I need to know about his family history. Of course. What do you need? To know? Well, I need information about his parents, where he was born, things like that. Just basic biographical information. Lisa was quiet for a moment. Clint, there is something about Danny's family that I never told Jake. Something that Danny made me promise to keep secret while he was alive. What kind of secret? Danny was adopted when he was a baby. His biological parents were very young when he was born, and they felt it would be better for him to be raised by a family that was ready for children. Clint felt his heart skip a beat. Do you know anything about his biological parents? Yes, Danny knew who they were. He had contacted them when he turned 18, but he decided not to pursue a relationship with them. He felt it would be disrespectful to his adoptive parents who had given him such a wonderful life. Lisa, this might sound like a strange question, but do you know the names of Danny's biological parents? His biological father was named Carlos Rodriguez. Carlos was in college when Danny was born. And his biological mother? Lisa paused. Her name was Allison Eastwood. Clint felt like the world had stopped spinning. The phone slipped in his hand and he had to grab it tightly to keep from dropping it. Did you say Allison Eastwood? Yes. Clint, are you okay? You sound strange. Lisa, Allison Eastwood is my daughter. The silence on the phone lasted for what felt like forever. Clint could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. What did you say? Lisa whispered. Allison is my daughter. If Danny's biological mother was Allison Eastwood, then Danny was my grandson. Lisa started crying harder. Oh my God, Clint, are you telling me that Danny was your grandson and none of us knew it? It appears that way. Lisa, I had no idea. Allison never told me about giving birth to a baby or giving a child up for adoption. Danny knew who his biological grandfather was. He had pictures of you and everything. But he made me promise never to tell anyone because he did not want people to think he was trying to take advantage of having a famous grandfather. Clint sat down heavily in his chair. His grandson, the young soldier whose stories had moved him so deeply, was his own flesh and blood. The brave medic who had died serving his country was his grandson, and Clint had never known he existed. Lisa, I need to ask you something and I want you to tell me the truth. Did Danny ever want to contact me? He talked about it sometimes, especially after Emma was born. He said he wondered what it would be like to have a grandfather for her, but he was always afraid that you would think he was just looking for money or fame. That would never have happened. I know that now after meeting you. But Danny was proud. He wanted to make his own way in the world. Clint thought about the young man in the military uniform and all those photos in Lisa's apartment. His grandson, a soldier who had served 3 tours in Afghanistan, saved lives as a medic, and written beautiful stories in his spare time. Lisa, there is something I need to tell you. When I gave Jake my airplane seat, I had no idea who he was or who Danny was. I just saw a tired soldier who looked like he needed some kindness. What are you saying? I am saying that somehow, without knowing it, I helped my grandson's best friend get to my grandson's memorial service. If that is not fate, I do not know what is. Lisa was crying so hard she could barely speak. Danny always believed that things happened for a reason. He used to say that the universe has a way of bringing the right people together at the right time. He sounds like he was a wise young man. He was. And Clint, he would have been so proud to know that his grandfather thought his stories were good enough to become movies. They are more than good enough, Lisa. They are exceptional. And now I understand why. Storytelling runs in his family. What happens now? Now I am going to make the best movie I can from Danny's story. And I am going to make sure the whole world knows that it was written by my grandson, Sergeant Danny Rodriguez, a hero who died serving his country. Will you tell Emma? That is up to you. But I hope you will let me be part of her life. I know, I can never replace Danny, but I would be honored to be her grandfather. Clint, she's going to be so excited. She's been asking me if you are ever coming back to visit. Tell her that Grandpa Clint will be there very soon." After they hung up, Clint sat in his office for a long time looking at Danny's notebooks with completely new eyes. His grandson had been a soldier, a medic, a husband, a father, and a writer. He had lived a life of service and sacrifice, and he had died protecting others. Clint picked up his phone and called his daughter Allison. It was time for some long overdue conversations about family, about choices made years ago, and about a grandson who had lived and died without knowing how much his grandfather would have loved him. But mostly, it was time to make sure that Danny Rodriguez's stories were told, and that his daughter Emma knew she came from a family of storytellers, soldiers, and people who believed in doing the right thing, even when it was difficult. 6 months later, when the movie based on Danny's story won 3 Academy Awards, Clint dedicated his acceptance speech to "My grandson Danny Rodriguez, who taught me that heroes come in many forms, and that sometimes the greatest gifts come from people we never had the chance to meet." In the audience that night, Jake Miller sat next to Lisa and Emma Rodriguez, all of them crying tears of joy and sadness as the world learned about a soldier whose words had touched his grandfather's heart and changed all their lives forever.